James Comey, the former FBI director, indicted last night after a very convoluted process. We'll get into that because President Trump had literally admitted that he wanted to call the play and have this person indicted regardless of doubts and evidence problems within his own DOJ. Comey is now speaking out. When this news first broke about this within this hour last night, about 24 hours ago, we had just gotten the indictment, just gotten that news. We now have a statement from James Comey, which denies any wrongdoing. That indictment you see here is short in substance, in literal length, about a page and a half. And in the bottom there, it is short in signatures because this highly unusual, many say prejudicial process lacks the most recent U.S. attorney who's been there since Trump started this year because that person was ousted, lacks the career prosecutors, just the lone signature of someone with no prosecutorial experience installed by Donald Trump, apparently, to get an indictment that no one else in his DOJ would sign. Now, it alleges that Comey knowingly made a materially false statement in congressional testimony and thus was trying to influence, obstruct, or impede what is Congress's power of inquiry. Now, the indictment is so thin, and sometimes indictments are sparse, but not usually this sparse when you're dealing with such a significant high-level former official, doesn't really get into the statements. But there is reporting that the government wants to go into basically whether or not Comey was truthful in referring to people who might have spoken out about what was going on inside the FBI and his views, basically authorizing a type of statement or leak. Now, the charges are rushed because the deadline was next week. The actual legal process of the arraignment for former Director Comey is October 9th. I reported this week that we are past the red line, that if you use the analogy of the boiling frog, when it comes to the rule of law, the frog has been boiled and it's dead. And we're now past the red line at a point where we are seeing how people deal with that. In the matter of unconstitutional attacks on free speech, we saw how big, powerful, rich executives might fold and then backtrack. We saw that this week. In the matter of the rule of law, we've seen how law firms and other individuals who literally take an oath, they're not just tax-paying citizens, they're members of the bar, how they have dealt with these efforts by Donald Trump to abuse power, to use the federal government to deny people legal services or make it harder with what are probably, some courts say, likely unconstitutional efforts to kneecap law firms based on their First Amendment and other legal rights who they associate with or represent. Trump's brazen efforts to do this have come with confessions in public. And in our strange time, our rapidly shifting media ecosystem, some people say, well, how bad can it be if he's saying it in public? But again, he has admitted to many things in public that he just wants you to accept. Whether or not a judge or jury ultimately accepts this case is one test. But it's not the only one, because there is a wider effort to abuse government power to not only go after people who have taken great risks or done public service or used their First Amendment rights to speak out against him. That is an issue that unites Jimmy Kimmel and James Comey this week in different ways, but government efforts to target that. Donald Trump doesn't deny that. They didn't deny that they were targeting Kimmel for what he said, and they don't deny they're targeting Comey for his, what they view as opposition to Trump, which is allowed in this country. You still are allowed to serve in the government and then criticize the government, or be a citizen and criticize the government. So there are big concerns here about the DOJ's independence. Trump vowing more.
Now that James Comey has been indicted, who is the next person on your list in this retribution?
It's not a list, but I think there'll be others. I mean, they're corrupt. There'll be others. Look, that's my opinion.
There'll be others, and that is his opinion. The opinion of a politician has always been, and the law governs this, different than whether there are facts to bring a case, probable cause to open an investigation, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to convict someone, and prosecutors who take those standards seriously and don't just accept the calls, even from important politicians. James Comey, who knows a lot about this system, he is in that rare position of going from actually overseeing these kinds of cases, developing the evidence, meeting with DOJ, running the FBI, to being on the other side of the FBI that develops these kind of cases and the DOJ that prosecutes them. And he says he's innocent, And he understands in the wider context why this is a time to also address other Americans about the fear that this president would want anyone to have just for being American, for exercising your rights. So here was Mr. Comey's response.
We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Let's have a trial, which of course no single politician controls, even one trying to do all these power grabs. A trial, as we all know from civics textbooks or watching Law & Order, a trial involves other people, 12 of your peers. And Mr. Comey sounds pretty confident that if they don't get this case dismissed before then, and they have some good arguments before then, what are called pretrial motions with regard to government misconduct and other things. But if they don't get it dismissed before then, he sounds pretty confident that 12 people, hearing all the evidence, will acquit him, and perhaps few more negatively, the government's case and the sordid path we got here on. Now, what is in this two-pager I mentioned? It's a thin set of charges. The grand jury reportedly rejected a requested third charge against Comey. There's a form that shows they declined this additional false statements charge, which is significant because, as you probably know from the ham sandwich saying, grand juries tend to accept reasonable or well-presented government arguments and move it along. In fact, grand juries are generally kind of under the view that this is not the end of the case, it's the beginning, and if somebody's innocent, they'll get their chance later. But they hear out the prosecutors. They're a tool of the prosecutors, and yet on 1 out of 3, they said no already. We also have reporting that only 14 of the 23 grand jurors signed off on these counts, meaning there was already unusually high dissent on the 2 counts that passed muster. Legal experts say this is a pretty unserious beginning to a case against a very serious, respected government veteran, that it could end in spectacular failure, and in a sign of how we should cover this and whether people should just give in to Trump's effort to misuse the process to make everyone sound like a defendant and be on defense, a warning that this is now what prosecutors do in dictatorships. As for the path I mentioned, the prosecutor who brought the case is formerly Donald Trump's personal defense lawyer. And she is lonely as a legal matter, the sole signatory on that indictment. Usually you have several, which shows the legal process of people, again, members of the bar, signing their name to something that they think is legally defensible. She doesn't have experience presenting to a grand jury. Usually of a matter of this import against an FBI veteran, you'd want a veteran to do it, but she marched in there alone, apparently because no one else would do it, and senior prosecutors had already written what's called a declination memo, ruling that there wasn't evidence to proceed on this case. Now, everything I've just told you is about why it's already this thin. But there's more. And the more is bad news for the Trump DOJ, which, make no mistake, is in crisis tonight. This is something that they did not want to do. This is something for career prosecutors, why it wasn't brought as of last week. They got to hand that over, so we might see it. We might see moments that are described in emails or memoranda, descriptions of pressure being brought to bear, whether that's from the president or somewhere else. We might learn why, up to this week, Pam Bondi had not signed off on doing this, or whether she was informed, briefed, or agreed with the doubts about this very case. Remember, prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt Comey intended to lie to the Senate committee. Not that there was a misstatement, but that this was his unlawful, corrupt intent that day. And this brings me to the more. If you say, okay, well, people must have misstatements before Congress, sure. But that criminal level is a high bar for a reason. It's an exclusive, rare group of people who have ever actually gotten in trouble criminally for lying to Congress, and usually, like Michael Cohen, when there were other charges involved. Those convictions average out, if you do a rough count, and it's give or take, but it's not a monthly or yearly thing. It's about one a decade, according to an obscure study that looked at this obscure charge. And then remember the other side of the ledger. Donald Trump has weaponized and incentivized going after these kind of opponents. In his view, he sees them as opponents for many years. He was in power for a whole first term. We already know that Comey and his deputy were audited, which was unusual from a financial side. We know that they were investigated. We know that they testified. Remember, Comey went before Congress in a way that some other officials have resisted or delayed. He went and spoke under oath. So they were cooperating. And then they're being investigated for that cooperation. And this has been reviewed many times. I'll get into that tonight as well. And that's just Comey. There is a wider list of individuals that Trump has identified as critics or foes, and some are indicted, upper left. Some were indicted and the case already fell apart, the mayor. Upper middle, Comey, indicted yesterday and the case already on the ropes in a substantive and legal sense. Longtime conservative lower right John Bolton searched, which looks like they're developing a case against that former Trump appointee. And so this chart tells you a story. And it's the story we're covering at the end of a big week for America and the Constitution. And the story is it's not about red and blue or left and right. It is about whether you agree with the would-be autocrat politician or not.